And here we go.
Very serious clap.
Yeah, thank you. I bought a farm. I don't know.
You did?
I did.
I think 9.
Episode 9.
I think.
We've got a lot of stuff. So it's just Jared and I on this I bought a farm. We've been cranking on some of the Hunter episodes because we're starting to get in the mindset of deer season velvet. How's that? Cranberry juice. Do you have a UTI?
It does taste like medicine.
Does it?
Yeah, I don't mind it though.
Ocean spray.
Juice cocktail.
Isn't that where the whole thing with the Stevie Nicks song started? And the guy was drinking like cranberry, ocean spray cranberry on the skateboard.
Yep.
Pop culture fact.
That was a jam. Stevie Nicks. That was Stevie Nicks. It was the
Fleetwood Mac.
Fleetwood Mac. That's right.
Yeah, good jam.
Great jam.
Well, so it's just us today. We've got a little bit to catch up on. So my tenant is gone tomorrow.
You said, I'm burning your house down.
That's what happens when you let crackheads mess with your tractor,
kind of landlord
man.
you want right there.
Yeah, I mean,
tough love.
You know, I think she thought I was bluffing, and then she actually got kicked out. So she's moving out.
Well, when you let your crackhead buddies tear apart your landlord's tractor, that's what happens.
And the bad part is it wasn't even a possible steal. Like, it was behind 2 locked gates. You weren't going anywhere.
Yeah, well, see, you're talking logically. Like, this is making sense to you and I, but when you're on crack...
So, so this kind of...
I think Miss Mullen's smoking crack.
Yeah, so this kind of throws a twist in the plans. But...
hey, Nick, if you get a chance, we got a split in our curtain back there.
I am going to... Well, I've got another couple that is looking for a house. I don't know if they're going to want it. Frankly, the house is a piece of crap. Like, it's not good.
Yeah.
So I'm going to let them look at it, and if they want to rent it, great. But if not, I'm going to start tearing her down.
Yeah.
Which is cool because I talked to... We didn't have Kara on here, but I talked... Kara's our lady from Ag Choice that we use. And she basically said, as long as I have a proposal signed for that metal building, then I don't have to pay the difference between... Like, I'm not taking that property away and not replacing it with something to make up the loan to value difference. And even still, like, if I had to bring a couple grand down, like, I'd rather do that and not have to worry about that house. But what was funny is, like, so her daughter said that they were starting to move her mom out, and she's like, we found these pictures. They found pictures from, like, 1997. Dude, the house was, like, 6 feet underwater from the creek flooded and stuff.
Really?
Like, the truck's underwater, the railing, in their living room, the couches were floating in their living. How did that not, like, condemn the house?
Oh, I mean, the Dairy Mart's been underwater.
Has it?
Yeah.
Wow.
A lot of stuff has. I mean, you must be in a 100-year floodplain there.
Probably.
You can look on map, right?
Crazy.
Yeah, that's nuts.
So, anyways, I'm going to take it down. That's the plan unless...
Well, I mean, that's good, for our listeners. I mean, you're kind of getting a dose here of, we've kind of had, discussions around if you want to have tenants, that's one potential revenue generator from a piece of property was helping your mortgage.
Yeah. And there's definitely people that have good tenants. It's just...
That's what it comes down to, if you have good tenants.
Yeah, and honestly, even if you have good tenants, so like the building we're in now, I have tenants in, like, I'm still responsible if the toilet breaks or if the lights go out. Like, I have to fix it.
That's why all the toilets are broken?
Yeah. Just jiggle the handle. It'll work.
Jiggle it.
But yeah, so, I mean, you still are responsible as a landlord to fix it.
It folds.
Yeah, there you go. See?
It flushes.
We could tie that in, Nick. Put that on TikTok. But, I mean, it just depends on how involved you want to be. And for most of us, if we're an absentee landowner, which when we buy a lot of these farms we are, you can't. It's physically impossible to be there to go and fix a light out or this out or something. So then you're paying somebody to do it, and it's costing more money. So, yeah, in theory, like, and again, this is the whole learning process we kind of brought to the table is like, in theory, it sounded great that I was going to make an extra, $3 or $4 grand a year off of a tenant to help pay down my mortgage. In reality, like, I'm more worried about my stuff on the farm being stolen or broken into. It's not worth it.
Yeah.
It's not worth the $3 or $4 grand.
Yep. I think that's the move. So you're, on the way to tearing it down is what it sounds like.
Yeah, probably. And replacing it with probably a small metal building that I can keep the tractor and stuff in down there.
Cool. I think it's a good move. You got a builder yet?
No.
Yeah.
I've talked to a couple of them. down in that
Some
area.
local guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some good guys. Just a couple areas that they'll do the pad, and then they'll come in and hell, metal building they have up in like a day and a half anymore.
Yeah,
they're
nice.
fast. So then it's I think a big thing that we've looked at recently is, or at least what we've come across, and we really haven't talked about it, I guess, is oil and gas rights. It's kind of a big discussion point that we've had from a real estate perspective in the last, 2 months maybe.
Yep.
Now we're in Western Pennsylvania, so we are in kind of an oil and gas haven here. But if you're in West Virginia or Eastern Kentucky or Ohio, or if you're in the Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, you obviously are dealing with a lot more oil than you are natural gas. It's a big asset for a lot of these properties. So number one is, do you own oil and gas rights on your property? And then number two is, are you in an area where it's actually going to be worth something?
Yeah. And full disclosure, we're going into a conversation here of something we're literally learning about on a daily
100%.
basis about.
And what's crazy about it, so let's start with the really cool part. If you own a piece of property, if you go back and look at your deed, it typically will mention which, if you don't know, deeds are accessible. Yep.
You can go on, like most, I'm going to say 99% of people have never seen, other than like when they
bought it,
purchased the property. Maybe you glimpsed at the deed real quick, but there's stuff in there that tells you about your property, the status of oil and gas rights, and
coal rights
that may have been purchased prior to the 60s or whatever.
Yep.
It's all in there.
Yep, 100%. And so first step, look at that. Second step that you should see is, do you actually own any or all of the oil and gas rights on your property? And in many places, it may not even be a discussion because it's not worth anything. Like if you're in Minnesota, like for instance, it's probably not worth anything up there. But Minnesota. If you're in our area or Ohio or Kentucky, West Virginia, it definitely is worth something in a lot of cases. So first thing is to be able to check your deed and see if you have those oil and gas rights.
And the way to find that is, there's multiple aggregators essentially. So like in our counties, it's like LandX, U.S. Land Records. There's a few of them. I would imagine if you just Google your county and then do deed search, you should be able to find it. And it costs, it's cheap, but $2
to $5 per deed.
Yep. Butler County's free. You can look that up, and they have a great program. But
most of them are $2 to $5.
Find it that way.
Yep. And I think this is also, if you guys are looking to purchase a property and you're in these areas,
do your
100% do your research. Well worth it. Jared and I just pulled one a couple days ago, looking at a piece of property that's 78 acres, not too far from us, and it's in an area where I think oil and gas is, pretty strong. So I pulled the deed records, and sure enough, the owners still own the oil and gas, and there's an active lease from an oil and gas company on it, which tells me it's worth something.
Who'd have thunk it?
Who'd have thunk it? So, for a $5 investment, now I know that not only is the surface beneficial for us making a hunting property, but if we can get the oil and gas rights too, that's got value.
Yeah, and I think we're still kind of unsure or trying to like figure out. And you mentioned before we got right on this podcast, we have some guys that are oil and gas investors that
we'll probably end up bringing one or two in.
Have more knowledge on whether or not your oil and gas rights are valuable or could be valuable some days, and we're still, I think, figuring that out. But it does seem like, and a lot of people are aware of kind of this fact, is there's shallow wells all over southwestern Pennsylvania. All those things that you see that have the little pump jacks in them. That's what that is. It pumps oil and gas.
Yep.
Depending on, I think, the state of the material that's coming out of the ground, and typically seems like those are signed for a set time period to begin.
Yep.
But then are extended based on
production,
a minimum level of production. And sometimes those come with like free domestic gas to the property that it's servicing, and sometimes it doesn't. So all those are things that you'll find in the deed.
Yeah, and keep in mind too.
Or I'm sorry, the
lease agreement.
In the lease agreement itself.
Keep in mind that the ebb and flow is also a big one here, in that, a lot of times you may look at it and may not be producing right now, but that's because they've basically shut off production in that area. 2 years from now, they could turn back on production and it could be making $5,000-$6,000 a month for that property. So, it's going to change. It's not a steady thing. It's not like you look at it and you're going to continue to invest in it. But, most of these places are producing, somewhere in the neighborhood on a max level or average max level of $100 per acre is what the kind of rule of thumb is. So if you've got 50-acre property, and that becomes all 50 acres goes under a lease production, best case scenario, you're going to make about $5,000 a month on your oil and gas rights. And so the two ways to look at that is, number one, royalties, which that's what that royalty is. That's not like a percentage. It is $5,000 a month. Or, could you sell those to an oil and gas investor, which is a lot of the people that we work with, who essentially will pay you maybe $250,000 up front for that, knowing they're playing the long-term game. So you have to look at it and say, do I want to just make $5,000 a month for the next X years with an unpredictability, or do I want to sell it now?
It's like purchasing a business from their standpoint. It's like, you have something that's generating revenue, maybe $100,000 a year or something. Somebody comes in and offers to buy you, purchase 2.5 times what you're producing at a profit level. Same concept. And the cool thing here for us is most of the people listening to this, we care about the surface rights. Right, we want to make a better deer hunting, better hunting property, recreational property.
Rights
is what matters.
Yep, and so you can separate those rights. You can sell those oil and gas rights and still maintain your surface rights to everything that you want. Especially in most of these areas where they're doing horizontal drilling, they'll never even disturb your surface. Where people are more familiar with in these rights and sellable rights is like timber rights. So there are a lot of properties. In fact, I think you and I came across one the other day that. I think it was like 50% of the timber rights were withheld to somebody during the cut. So it was basically sold, but prior to selling the farm, the timber rights were sold. So there was a percentage going back to the original seller for that. Yeah. So, when you think about this, like oil and gas rights are no different than your timber rights. It's just all of these things are an asset, and they can be used in the right way. Now, that said, I'll give a great example. Like I have 100% of the oil and gas rights for my property here in Fayette County, and it's 28 acres. As of right now, it's not in any production zone. There's some wells around, but nobody's come to me and say, hey, Jeremy, I want to give you whatever, $100 a month per acre to drill, in underneath your property. So just because you have them doesn't mean like you're all of a sudden going to be able to make money off of them or they're going to be worth something. It's better to have them than not. But ultimately, it all depends on where you are and what the activity in that area is.
Yeah, on a bigger picture, again, part of me is speaking out of my ass because we're still figuring this out. But like there's a political element to all of this. The way that our energy, is generated. Whether it's via an oil and gas vehicle, or if it's more whatever your other power sources would be, solar, wind, XYZ, burning coal at one time, that very much affects the value and thus the production and whether or not it's happening on your property.
Yeah, and I think it's just the whole goal of this podcast is for us to kind of be able to talk through the ways that you can make money from a property, and if you're about to buy a property, what are the ways that property could pay for itself over time, or what's the true value?
Well, and to the discussion around oil and gas, OGMs, as we call oil, gas, and mineral rights, there's a lot of uncertainty, especially in the real estate agent space. I think a lot of people just don't know, or they don't have experience, and I would venture to say it's even more so at the landowner level. We don't know. What rights do we have? First of all, which ones of them are leased? Are we getting fair, market value for them? Can they be spliced out and sold separately from other elements of value on your property? And so I think, anyways, we're trying to just call attention to that for ourselves more than anything as we're learning, to just also point out, like, hey, if you're working with another real estate agent or anybody, or you own land, you're consider the OGMs on this property. Yeah,
I think it's a big one. There's plenty of real estate agents, and it's just because they mainly deal in residential real estate that they have no idea what an OGM is. Haven't dealt with it, don't deal with it. They'll list a piece of land, don't even know.
And that is the primary difference. Frankly, it's our responsibility as land specialists for whitetail properties, in our case, to understand OGMs and other things that come with property. Traditional real estate agents, as you said, are primarily house sellers. They have knowledge on the square footage of the home, the way the utilities are hooked up, XYZ, and those things are very important if you're looking for a home. But ultimately, the land is still there. It's valuable, and it should be considered.
Well, and I think if you start to think about it, and I'm sure there's plenty of people listening to this who have an active oil and gas lease, and listen, it can be very fruitful. I mean, the fact that you could be getting a royalty check for $5,000 a month on 50 acres. That's a substantial amount of money. So if you finance that, you're easily probably paying for it. If you didn't finance it or you're paying it down, I mean, you could pay this property off a lot quicker. And even we had a discussion the other day that one of these investors, it sounds like some of the banks are actually starting to look at that asset as a collateralized opportunity. Not all banks, but
asset.
Yeah, but seeing these royalty statements and what this thing is producing, almost like a business, that they're able to then be able to loan against.
Which
that.
lenders have you heard are doing that?
Some of the local banks that have been doing it, like Greene County. Yeah.
Seems risky. I mean, it's just like timber. The same reason that a lot of people won't lean against timber is because the market fluctuates. This exact same is true with oil and gas.
Well, and what you get into, and we're going to go down a wormhole here real quick, but we'll come out. But there's a lot of other things that have happened in the oil and gas fields that have created debts, essentially. So whether it's a divorce debt or it's a business debt or it was a partnership debt, is that there are debts existing against the royalties of the oil and gas. Nothing to do with the surface of the property, meaning if the property sells, there's no royalty, there's no kickbacks, there's nothing there, but purely on the royalties of the oil and gas, and become a business where people were actually going out there and buying up these debts on this royalty, knowing that if that well starts to produce, they're one of the first people to get paid because there's a debt leaned up against it.
So how does that debt get
which
created?
Is no different than a foreclosure, right? When you think about a foreclosure, if it's a tax lien or a mortgage lien, that ends up going to either a sheriff's sale or a foreclosure sale from the bank. Like there's a debt up against that you're then going to buy the debt, right?
So how do those get created? Is that a debt that's put against the property as a whole that once these other assets are eaten up and there's still debt that exists?
I think a lot of it is debt tied to the real estate as an asset. So there's surface real estate,
right? That's
then
what
there's
I mean.
Oil and gas real estate. So
it's not necessarily created
by by like a domino effect. It is simply like, hey, as part of the settlement, I want royalties on the oil and gas. And I say that because if you're in an area where oil and gas is, a thriving business, there's a tremendous value. In fact, I mean, there's some people, we call them like the hillbilly millionaires, and that's not disrespectful, but literally they owned like nothing land in the butt crack of Pennsylvania. And all of a sudden these oil and gas companies come in and probably didn't do a fair deal with them, but still literally made these guys millionaires overnight selling these properties out. And basically they would go in and say, I want to buy your oil and gas 100%. I'll give you $10,000 an acre. Yes. Yeah. Done. And so, you created this amount of money in this business. Now, what's happened since then is it has exploded to where, I mean, you can't go, 2 miles in most of Western Pennsylvania without passing a gas well. Mm-hmm. And most of these are capped. They're not in production. And so now it's very isolated pockets of production from certain energy companies. And so just because you have a well, like there's plenty of people I talked to a couple the other day, they were making $10,000 a month on 2 wells on their property. They make $50 a month now because those wells are just not in production. Mm-hmm. And will it happen in 2 years? Will it happen in 20? We don't know. Yeah. They may never produce again.
Right.
And so it's not something that once it happens, it continues to go, which is why I think it's becoming more important of a discussion when you're buying or selling real estate that, I think most people said they always wanted to hold back oil and gas. Like, no, I'm not selling. Like, I'll sell surface. I don't want to sell that. But now it's like, well, you're making $100 a month. Sure, 5 years from now, that could be producing $10,000 a month again, but it also could still be producing $100 a month. Are you willing to take that risk?
Yeah. I mean, it becomes one of those things where it's like, people get attached to the idea that it could make money, even if it never did, because they know somebody that it did, or they've just heard
100%.
Maybe they saw the movie There Will Be Blood, and they're like,
"Ooh,
we got to hold on to that." I was going to ask you, Nick, have you seen that movie?
You're kidding me. Daniel Day-Lewis?
I don't think so.
Wow.
We're going to fix that.
Best get that.
You got to watch that with your new woman.
Okay.
Yeah, you best get that one rolling.
That on the list.
There Will Be Blood. That's a must watch.
Yeah.
You know who Daniel Day-Lewis is, right?
I don't think so.
Played Lincoln.
Wow.
Was in what's Gangs of New York.
Gangs of New York.
He was the butcher in Gangs of New York.
Never saw Gangs of New York.
With Leo DiCaprio. Oh my gosh!
I just watched.
What
Wolf
are you,
of Wall
12?
Street for the first time.
You just watched what?
Wolf of Wall Street.
Holy
for the first
Jesus!
Wow, great movie.
Yeah.
So
One of the best. Yeah, that was a fantastic movie.
You better keep your headphones on. You're gonna learn something here.
Wow. You ever seen No Country for Old Men?
Wow.
Dude, I've like,
Dude,
I don't watch movies. I don't know. Everyone is always like, "You ever seen this movie?" And I'm like, "No,
what do you watch?
I don't know." YouTube.
Cartoons.
Anyways,
Japanimation.
There Will Be Blood is a must
Yeah,
watch.
that's a great movie.
Yeah, check that one out.
But yeah, so I mean, you've got that mindset of like, well, I don't want to sell them, and you have to understand that like most of these investors, the reason that they're doing what they're doing is they're willing to take risk. As a landowner, my goal is to just make as much money on the property as I can, or pay for that property. I don't think that most of us are in a position where we want to say, yeah, you know what, I'm going to decline your $200,000 offer, and I'll bank on this making that money over the next 10 years.
It's a tough position as a landowner, man. Because like, dude,
Your parents did it, right?
what?
Did they sell or lease?
Least.
So they still own them.
Yep.
And they've just leased the rights out.
Yep.
And they're not producing right now, right?
I don't know.
At one point they were.
Yep.
They were cranking.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, my parents and my uncle and stuff, they were smart enough to involve an attorney to fight for a
100%.
fair commission rate off of those. And I mean, I don't know what they get from that. I don't know what the neighbors get either.
Mm-hmm.
But as a landowner, it's tough to know. Like, we don't know what the oil and gas industry is doing. We're busy with our 9-to-5s and raising our kids or whatever else.
They didn't even register.
Trying to make time to hunt.
I would assume for
Well,
most
dude, frankly,
of us, it doesn't.
we've had 9 I Bought a Farm podcasts, and this is the first time we've mentioned oil and gas as an element of value.
And it's just from us being in the real estate business that this came. And I mean, keep in mind, I own three land pieces.
Yeah.
Right. I've got.
I'm pretty sure you had to go and look and see if you had the oil and gas rights on them.
I didn't even ask.
Yeah.
And yes, I own mine in Pennsylvania. Yes, I own mine in Kentucky. I own half of them in Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody has come to me and said, hey, Jeremy, I'll pay you X for this. Because that was the question I asked these investment guys, as we were building up to this. I was like, well, okay, I own them. Now what? Like, do I go to them and say, hey, buy my stuff? And they're like, no,
It's very mob mentality.
They'll
No,
come to you.
They'll find you.
And it's like, okay, well, what if they don't? And so we pulled, I think I sent you a link. It was, if you're in Pennsylvania, I think it's the DEP in Pennsylvania, forces them to have like an always ongoing active well registration. So anything that's active or anything that's capped, it's on this map. And you could see like clearly where like there's concentrated areas of activity right now. And so like if you're buying and or your property is in that, number one, better check if you have the oil and gas rights. And number two, you're probably going to get a phone call to say, hey, we want to horizontally drill in here. Here's our offer.
And
but you got to get an attorney involved.
We
can't do
we
that.
hear that, from places in Washington County and stuff. A lot of these people don't want to sell their oil and gas rights. And when we ask why, they're like, well, we're getting calls 2-3 times a week. People trying to buy.
I thought it was going to be creative. Because again, we've been in this for a while now. And we started to make these connections with these oil and gas buyers, and it's like, oh, let's start calling people and asking if they want to sell. And I talked to a lady the other day. She's like, I've had 5 calls in 2 weeks, and I'm like, really? She's like, yeah, 5 calls in 2 weeks on this stuff. I'm like, what?
Wow.
From who?
Yeah,
it's just people that are trying to acquire this stuff.
Well, I mean, obviously, there's a whole, a giant industry wrapped around this. It's maybe even bigger than real estate, itself in terms of the surface rights. But yeah, it's definitely there. It's worth, as a landowner, it's worth educating yourself on somewhat. It's kind of like a tenant thing. It's like, man, are you willing to take the risk of this thing producing revenue for me? Maybe on a grander scale, because you're like, this thing could make me $1 million over my lifetime, or I could sell it for $250,000 tomorrow.
And probably not affect your surface ability to use that property at all.
Yeah, or it could make no money.
Could make no money.
It's a big,
Well, and I think that's where you start going back into like, ways to make money off the property. Like timber's the other way, and timber rights are a big thing. Like there's a lot of people. I mean, how many properties do we see hit the market and they've just been timbered? Like you can tell, you look at it and it's like, okay, they just raped that property and put it back on the market.
Yeah.
It'll be 35 years before I can do a select cut and it's going to be trash. So, I think that you start to look at those and as a landowner or as an investor into a piece of recreational property, Like you owe it to yourself to do the due diligence to figure out what rights you are getting with that property. Again, if you're in, I don't know, upstate New York, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe their oil and gas isn't a big deal up there. I don't know.
Yeah.
It could be, and if you're going to buy a farm, I think you want to try to get those oil and gas rights. That's part of the negotiations you should be doing as a with your real estate agent or whoever you're using.
Or valuing it in a way that, accounts for the fact that they're not involved.
Correct.
Included.
Correct. And I think then, part of the things that we've seen, and we've had this conversation with other people, is the mineral side, which would be revolving around coal. And then in most of the areas that we deal with, coal rights have been sold since the early 1900s. They're long gone. But the right is that they can come in and they could strip your surface for coal. Now they have to pay you a damages fee.
Strip your surface.
But they're going to strip it. They're going to take it all. They're going to rip it apart. And I mean, we've got people that sounds like, they're in a legal kind of limbo right now because they're trying to figure out, well, great, you have access to get this coal, but you're going to destroy my property. How do you value that? Mm-hmm. But these are things that as you're starting to buy into properties and stuff, you got to understand what's going on, because the last thing you want to do is buy this beautiful farm. Next thing you know, guy comes up and says, hey, we have coal rights. We're going to strip this whole thing out. And then you literally are stuck.
Yeah.
Like maybe you make enough money to pay for that farm and then go buy a new one. But like that farm that you had set your eyes on is gone. It's stripped out.
Yeah. And that's, I think one area that we're still kind of considering is, first of all, in a lot of these like standardized real estate documents that are issued by Pennsylvania,
Real Estate Commission,
some of them specify coal and others don't. It's involved in minerals along with gold, silver, and myrrh.
Myrrh.
And so it's like, it's kind of convoluted even on our end to try to understand, okay, we can see here in the deed the coal has been sold. We understand that coal supersedes all other mineral rights. Therefore, they can come in and do X, Y, Z. But as it relates to real risk for, not only a landowner, but a potential home builder, if somebody wants to build on their brand, what are the risks?
Yeah, that's where mine subsidence insurance and stuff comes in a lot of places that, I think my house, I have it, because there were existing mines that were in that area.
Well, and even before that, can I build here? Can I build here without risk of them?
Or water contacontamination if I need to put a well in?
Sure.
Like all of those things are really big.
Well, that for sure is. If ground's been stripped, for coal, you can't.
No
it's not
well.
You can't perk
Can't
test
perk
that,
it.
which is what you need for a
septic system.
A septic system, exactly.
Yeah, and you wouldn't be able to drill a well there because your water would never pass the test.
Right.
Yeah, it's a huge debacle that we started to like dive into here on our professional careers, which automatically feed back to our personal lives. Is that when you get into this stuff, and listen, at the end of the day, you're just trying to do base surface research, right? Go and try to find the deeds, try to look at what your property is or the one you want to buy, see if you can track down if they still have a oil and gas, see if they have an active lease on it. But this is why you're paying usually a settlement company for title insurance, right? You're paying a company or a lawyer to do title work to determine the actual assets that are in that transfer, and then you pay for the insurance to then hold them to that. Meaning if it comes back and somebody says, actually, you don't have all the oil and gas rights per X, Y, and Z from 1905, then you go to them and say, well, I have title insurance on this, and they'll pay for that loss. So, that's your protection.
Well, yes, but there's an additional search that focuses on OGMs more in depth that...
In terms of like production and stuff?
Yeah. In terms of like the status of all of those to say, hey, like officially your coal was sold XYZ long ago, and here's the lease agreement. Here's, what this all entails. So to fully
Typically
understand
that's in the deed pretty clearly. That coal, the seam or the vein of coal has been sold.
Yeah, agreed.
Yep. The oil and gas is the one that seems to be a little bit, because if it's not mentioned, then it's assumed you have it, but you have to go back to make sure that it wasn't removed at some part previously. Just like a right-of-way. If you have a right-of-way agreement, oftentimes that'll be set back in a deed, and then the next deed won't even mention the right-of-way because it's already set in the previous one.
And so for anybody wanting to do this search, on their own, is when you go to, Allegheny County, deed search, that same aggregator, or website portal will also contain documents other than the deed that that pertain to the property. So like you said, those could be mortgage satisfactions. Those could be
oil and gas leases.
Divorce
decrees.
Yep, there's a handful of them. So, all the information about your parcel as it's identified by, 1, the landowner name, or 2, the actual parcel number that, Frank, if you're curious, reach out to us. We'll help you figure that out, or just Google it. You'll figure it out.
And typically what you're looking for there is basically anything that legally had to be assigned, meaning the transfer of a real estate asset usually is recorded with the county, then it shows up. There could be things that are notarized, like, transfer of debt, payoff of debt, things like that may not show up as a recorded assignment, and those wouldn't be in the county. And so somebody could still potentially bring those to court and say, hey, these are official documents. But for the most part, when it deals with real estate assets, oil and gas leases, surface rights, timber rights, etc., mortgages, that's all going to be recorded with the county, tied into the name of the owner. That's the other thing, is typically you can't search by parcel number to find like the entire chain of that parcel for the last 100 years. You have to find the owner, then go back to the owner who gave the grantor of that deed to find the next deed. And
well, that's why the searches can be difficult. I mean, sometimes you start with one deed and it references multiple others, and you have to go down the chain.
I think an interesting thing that we've kind of looked at, and it's not like a secret for anybody, but we've tried to start looking at potential investments of our own, and it doesn't mean that you can't find like good values and investments on the market. In fact, we're probably leaning ourselves into more of a buyer's market here in the next few months. So there'll probably be an influx of supply out there, but if you're in an area and you say, well, I want to, these are the areas that I want to hunt, 20-minute radius from my primary home or whatever. Like, go in and start looking at parcel data. It doesn't matter if you use HuntStand app or whatever. Like, ultimately, go look at your parcel data, figure out who that landowner is, and then call them. Basically say, hey, I saw you own 100 acres here. Here's where I live. I just want to know if you'd ever be up for selling. Worst they're going to say is, no, I'm not interested, or they don't call you back. But you may get somebody that says, yeah, you know what? I don't really need this property anymore. This is what Nick was doing a lot. I don't really use this property. Like, I'd be interested in an offer. And listen, if you want the right property and you want to pay the best price for it, you have to get it before it hits the market. Once it hits the market
100%.
Will bear everything.
Dude, that's just life, man. And
it is.
It's any industry. If anything is good enough for an industry to be structured around or built around, there are people combing the best stuff off the top and then putting it through
100%.
the process. I mean, we found that out with leases. I mean, it's textbook. Real estate is the same thing. That's why you work with a real estate agent, is a lot of these properties get sold before they go to market. So, because if somebody says, hey, I want to sell this property, before I even pay for all the platforms to list the thing, I'll say, I got a buyer for you.
Yep, absolutely. And you'll probably get a better negotiation because it's going to be a quick one out the door. I think that the big thing that you have to put yourself in the place that you're going to get a bunch of no's. People are going to say, yeah, I'm not interested, or they're not going to call you back, right? That's fine. You got to have tough skin over that thing. What you ultimately have to figure out is you're not going to go around and just offer on all these farms. Like, keep in mind, like, what do you want? What do you want in a farm? Like, if you look at 10 farms that are within 10 miles of you, right? Not all of them are going to be the same. This one might be all pasture, and you're going to be like, well, what am I going to do with that?
And I'll say this to you, man. Like, the more properties that you and I have been on, like, I mean, I've known this, but at one point in time, you might have thought, well, if I could just get ground in this area, it's good. Not true. I think that, yes,
it's a step in the right
direction. The neighborhood's
direction.
super important, but like, dude, not every property is a good one.
No.
There's a lot of not great hunting properties out there,
and there's a lot of properties. When I started doing that search in Ohio, I kind of knew the counties that I wanted to be, which would be my neighborhood level. Like, if I can get in these neighborhoods, I'm in the right direction. Then I started looking on the micro level, and like, there was a great property, that Sturgis consulted in, and the more I talked to the neighbors, the more I was like, wow, I'm glad I didn't buy that property. And from the outside looking in, it was beautiful. It would have been like, I couldn't believe you wouldn't be able to kill multiple 150s every year.
What was the issue there?
Meth heads, neighbors.
Oh, meth heads in this case.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Which I think is my problem.
Which do you prefer, crackheads or meth heads?
I think they're one and the same.
Okay.
Yeah. I think meth heads are a little bit more experimental, more like the Breaking Bad style.
Yeah. Yeah.
Crackheads just are crackheads.
Meth head probably would have got away with your tractor.
No, I'm pretty sure the meth head. He could
have been plowing his own fields by now.
He put the screwdrivers into the battery. So.
Oh my goodness, that's crazy.
Oh, here's a good.
Wait, I got one for you too.
I got one too.
I replaced the Ranger died on me the other day. It was overheating.
Your new one?
No.
Oh,
Dad's.
Yeah.
So I had to move the. I don't use the bus bar. I go old school.
Yeah.
I hook her up straight to the battery for my sprayer.
Yeah.
I disconnected it and hooked it up to the mule.
Yeah.
And I got a nice spark. It never gets you, but you know when they touch either side? Yeah.
I had one too. No, I'll derange off of that one for a second.
Derange?
Derail. Derail. So I had that.
It's Daryl's pronounced like derail.
Derail. I had that underneath the old Honda down in Kentucky, and I didn't realize it, but I kept like backfiring. I'm like, what the hell is going on? It's because those things were touching, and that sumbitch was sparking underneath my seat. Good story.
Like down on my pubes were on fire.
But yeah.
Talk about Firebush.
Yeah. God, what the hell were we going to talk about now? Damn it. I had another one for you.
I don't know.
We're talking about mule, crackheads.
Oil and gas.
It'll come back to me. It was a good one though.
Okay.
I'll figure it out. But yeah, no, I think that, when you start to look at these kind of purchases in these different areas, like, yeah, I mean, you've got to make sure that you're in the right spot for sure, and it is the right property. I mean, we've all seen it, dude. There's got to be plenty of properties. Now, you're talking
about your property. You were honing it in on a micro level.
Yeah, and I don't remember. It's just I got derailed.
That's where we were at.
Deranged.
You got deranged on it.
Got derailed on it. Yeah, I don't remember. But no, what I'm saying on that small level is like, I'm sure we've all driven by a farm where we're like, that farm, that's the one. But until you have cameras or history on it, because that was the big thing that I look for in mine is like, once I found this farm and I walked it, and fortunately I walked it November 8th or something. So I mean, it was like peak buck sign. I'm like, well, Rob scrapes.
We'll take it.
Cool. Yeah, we're good. But then it's like, hey man, like, what have you seen on camera? Like, and it was tough to pry it out of the previous seller.
Really?
Yeah, it just wasn't real open with it. I think because like it was early, it was like first day it was on the market. So he's like, is this normal? I'm not sure. Finally he sent me at least enough pictures that I'm like, all right, I can make something happen here. But had he given me that, and it's because I see plenty of property.
The agent didn't pull that out of him first.
I saw there's plenty of properties I look at that I'm like, this is a great property. I look at the deer pictures, I'm like, these are all 1-year-olds.
Dude, in hindsight, you remember that property that you sent me? You're like, this has a legitimate like 230-inch deer on it. Remember that?
Oh yes.
There's no way that deer was on there.
Oh, the one in Adams County.
Yeah.
I think it was. That deer was giant.
I don't think it was.
How about that Maryland one I sent you the other day? Giant.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean that. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there was one I did catch. It was a Kentucky property, and they had posted some buck pictures. I mean, they were 140s or something, and then they had a cover of the like muzzleloader record for Kentucky. It was like 235. And so I called the agent, and she was like real confused. I'm like, well, you got this picture on there. I was like, did they kill that buck on this property? She's like, I don't know.
You're like, well, they killed it in this state. I know that.
Well, yeah, that's what I was like. Or are you just like advertising like what Kentucky has the offer? And it was just like crickets because she wasn't a lands person. She didn't know it. So she calls the seller. Seller calls me, and he's like, oh yeah. He's like, I was killed here. I'm like, really? I was like, that's a giant, man. Like, huge. I was like, how many years? Because he didn't kill it. And he starts telling me, and then I'm like, wait a minute. And I look, it's like 2 counties away. And so I call him back. I was like, yeah. I was like, it says it was killed in like X county. And he's like, yeah. No, I thought you were talking about one of the other bucks on there. I'm like, dude, you can't. That's false advertising. That's like rule number 1 in real estate. You can't do that.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised that a lot of people do that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, dude,
it draws you in.
It happens a lot. Jed, just the other day or a couple months ago, saw like a local outfitter, like, I don't know, within a half an hour probably, post some pictures of 50 Cent.
50 Cent.
Yeah. And was like, oh, we've got giants over here. And they might.
I remember now.
But you can't post a picture. And so Jed was like, yo, you can't do that.
Okay, it's back on the meth heads.
Okay.
So my guy who is putting in my HVAC unit, he works all in that area. and he was telling me about like how he's putting the boxes and stuff on there. He's like, because people try to break in and steal the copper out of them.
You're like, what is that, like a bear box? He's like, yeah, it's like a meth head box.
Yeah, it's pretty much. And I was like, why do you do it this way? He's like, well, basically, he's like, they either have to get electrocuted or they can't break in. And somebody got electrocuted last week. They found a crackhead outside of the house. He tried to cut the thing and it electrocuted him, killed him. Killed him.
Seems like a liability issue for like the for the HVAC company. It's like, yeah, no, we rig these to murder people. I would think there'd be an issue with that.
I just think of it as like
that's like the Viagra. If you have like it kills people because
I just think of it as like a bug zapper.
Yeah.
You just like sit out on your porch and like there goes one.
That can't be right. That's a huge liability.
He's
like
putting it in on my place, so we'll find out.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, not for you.
I mean, yeah.
For the HVAC, you'd be like, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, he's not rigging it any different. It's just when
he's like, see this? There's a power button.
when they cut into it, to try to get into the copper, like it's a live wire.
I get it. That doesn't seem like it should be able to do that.
Yeah.
Hilarious. I mean, it's funny.
I mean, it's like they still catalytic converters at all like the boat ramps now. That's what their whole gig is. They go under your truck, still a catalytic converter, out, gone. Sell it for $500 online. Big mess. Anyways, got derailed there for a little bit.
Okay, so that was you were talking about the bug snapper.
Yeah.
So I mean, anyways, I think we can get close to wrapping this one up here. I mean, point of our discussion here today is basically to point out the importance, I think, of oil, gas, and mineral rights, and coal along with that.
Yeah, and same with your timber rights. I mean, there are properties being sold out there that the timber's already gone.
Yep.
It's still standing, but it's sold.
Yep.
And they'll come in and cut it whenever they want. I mean, people see deals and they'll jump on them quick.
Fine. I mean, dude, it's fine. If some of that stuff is gone and it's okay. Like, I would consider buying a property that has been timbered. Yeah. If my purpose, granted, I'd like to have that element of value, but if it's not there, I'm just going to account for it in my offer price.
100%.
And so keep that in mind as a potential seller as well. That's what I advise all of our sellers on is if they say, hey, well, maybe I mentioned to them that you have nice timber there. There's marketable timber on this property. They said, well, should I take it off before I sell it? And typically I say no, because a lot of buyers will come in, see a recent harvest that's happened, say,
thing.
How much did they sell it for? We'll tell them, and they'll say, cool, well, I want that knocked off the market value. And,
and it's an aesthetic turnoff. I mean, I've had that discussion on Ohio. Like, when I'm ready to flip Ohio back out, do I come in and do a heavy select cut, or do I sell it with that timber standing and hope that I can get more money out of it?
It depends on the property.
I agree.
Depends on the property, what you're trying to do with it. I mean, I wouldn't discourage a buyer, and I'm telling you right now, someday I'll buy a property and timber it heavily, knowing that the wildlife value will only improve, and I'll sell it for that.
And that's the big thing, is if you're looking, and if you follow Jeff Sturgis or any of these guys, listen, it's cover. It's about cover. Ultimately, if you can create cover, you've got a better property. But yeah, I mean, when you're buying a piece of property or you own a piece of property, know what you own. What do you own? Do you own mineral rights? Do you own oil and gas rights? Do you have the timber rights? Understand how those values are out there, and you may have, like right now, my place in Kentucky, I own oil and gas. It's not worth anything, but 10 years from now, they may start drilling down there and it'd be worth whatever, $5,000 a month. Hard to say, but do yourself a favor and understand the different pieces of real estate that you're going to buy or sell prior to doing it.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's all I got for this week.
Cool.
All right. We'll see you next time on I Bought a Farm.
Later.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode of the I Bought a Farm podcast, make sure you check it out every other Thursday night on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube, and any other place that you might find your favorite podcast.